Sherlock Holmes and the Sacred Sword by Frank Thomas. Preface. That Sherlock Holmes was sans peer as regards the fine art of deduction is uncontested. That his exploits sparked the halcyon days of the late Victorian period with wonder and excitement is universally accepted. But where, pray tell, would readers be were it not for that staunch and loyal man of medicine, John H. Watson, M.D.? It was his eye for detail and his facile pen that gave us the adventures of that most unusual individual, Sherlock Holmes. Without Watson, Holmes would be but a dim legend, if indeed that. The Doctor's passing severed that final living link with those fascinating years during which his friend reigned supreme and criminals cringed at the mention of his name. But Watson left his words, thank heaven. Here's a toast to that gentle and patient man who so enriched his generation of readers, and all those that followed. To Watson, noble benefactor of both the science of criminology throughout the world, and fascinated readers everywhere. And one last note. I am grateful to have been on the spot that harrowing night during the London Blitz when Cox and Company, banking firm of Charing Cross, was bombed out of existence. For it was then that the famous dispatch box, containing the priceless unpublished cases, came into my hand. Now, back to the days of derring-do and deduction too, back to the mists and moonlight, where it is always 1895. By Frank Thomas, Los Angeles, 1980. Acknowledgements. In transferring Doctor Watson's word to the printed page, the author benefited from the assistance and encouragement of that foremost Holmes scholar and lecturer, John Bennet Shaw of Santa Fe, New Mexico, and Professor L. L. Aronson, Institute of Romance Languages, checked the language of the period. Elsie Probasco provided superior research, and Mona and Frank proofed copy and made workable suggestions. Thank you, Mother and Dad. Sherlock Holmes and the Sacred Sword. Chapter 1. The Dying Man. It was the evening of one of those rare days when there was an aura of peace at 221B Baker Street. Sherlock Holmes, with no case of importance at the moment, was seated at the desk, pipe in mouth, affixing clippings in one of his great file volumes. The precipitation that had manifested itself with pugnacious persistence during the afternoon showed no signs of abating. Globules of moisture were marching earthward in endless, serried ranks, to be whisked from their vertical descent by gusts of north wind and fired against our windows, like tiny pellets from a massed battery of celestial air guns. Holmes, like all true artists, was highly susceptible to moods and influenced by his surroundings. I anticipated that the inclemency would foster one of his dark periods, but his manner had been singularly cheerful during dinner. True, he had remarked, somewhat peevishly, that the criminal classes had displayed a deplorable lack of invention of late, but this was a familiar complaint uttered more from habit than conviction. To believe him would be to consider that crime was on the wane, an obviously false contention when one considered the two casebooks already filled with Holmes's exploits of the past 12 months. I was occupied with the recording of certain of Holmes's doings before, as he once said, they become churned by the undertow of time. I had just realized that some notes I required were in my bedstand upstairs when I heard the sound that my subconscious had been waiting for. The paste pot was shoved aside, the file volume was closed, and Holmes was on his feet, restless, of course. His footsteps crossed the room, and there was the tap of his pipe against the mantel, dislodging a dottle from its bowl. As I rose and crossed to the back stairs, I made a silent wager that within 2 minutes he would begin his nervous pacing of our quarters, his brain yearning for facts as other men hungered for food. He would become testy, resentful of the fact that the finest mind in England was without a puzzle in which to insert the probe of specialized knowledge. But then, I thought as I entered my bedchamber, we have been through this before. The wheels, due to spin for genius, seldom remain dormant for long. Events prove me right. There was the ring of the ground floor door, and when I descended to our sitting room, Holmes was on the landing, gazing down the 17 steps leading to our first floor chambers. "Come up, man, by all means," he called down the stairwell. "Billy," he continued in a softer voice, "not a word of this to Mrs. Hudson." I found this remark puzzling until a huge form appeared at our door. That in itself was not surprising, since visitors to Baker Street came in all sizes. But this one was carrying another man in his arms. As he crossed to deposit his burden on our couch, I instinctively headed for my medical bag beside the cane rack. Billy the page boy was on the landing, and gave Holmes a look of understanding as he closed the door. When the large man retreated from the crowd to allow me to inspect the body on it, Holmes muttered, "Watson, this is Burlington Bertie, an acquaintance of mine." I nodded in acknowledgment, and then my breath was dragged into my lungs, an involuntary reaction to a grimy shirt soaked with blood. Wound around the middle of the body was a white silk scarf which I cut loose. There were 3 vicious knife wounds in the man's abdomen and chest. My stethoscope revealed that his heartbeat was so faint that I had trouble finding it. I looked up at a grim-faced Holmes and the huge man beside him, with that, alas, frequent complaint of my profession. "The man is dying and there is nothing I can do." "Aye," mouthed Burlington Bertie, "'twas me thought he'd about had it." As though to disprove my diagnosis, the body on the couch twitched slightly, and from slack lips came a sound like an exultation. "Holmes!" My friend was beside the body in a trice. "Yes?" he said, his steely eyes intent on the prostrate figure. "They they found it." The words were barely audible, and there was a froth of blood in the corners of his mouth. Chew, it's chew. The colorless lips, stark against an ebony black face, tried to form more words, but the effort was too much. Suddenly the face fell to one side and the features sagged. His eyes had been closed tight, as though screwed against pain, but now they opened as a final signal that the end had come. My hands moved automatically, returning instruments to my valise. Then I gently closed those staring eyes, as inanimate now as two agate marbles. In deference to a departed soul, there was a lengthy silence, broken only by the somewhat stentorian breathing of Bertie standing alongside the whipcord body of my friend. I used pieces of the long silk sash to clean up the blood around the wounds in the corpse, and then rose to my feet with a sigh. "He went out like a man," said Burlington Bertie to no one in particular. "Best tell us about it." Holmes's eyes found mine, and, after depositing the blood-stained silk in our waste-basket, I made for the Tantalus and Gasogene. "How about him?" A grimy thumb indicated the body. "He's not going anywhere." Holmes crossed to the mantel and extracted shag from the toe of the famous Persian slipper. "Where did it happen?" "East Indian Docks, Gov. I was ambling along minding me business, like always, but I ain't never been deaf. There's this rumpus and some shouts, and then, through the Rhine, I see this cove battling with three boyos. Oh, is definitely trying to do him in. The odds look a little rum, and while I'm telling myself to keep out of trouble, this un here, the negro, fetches one rascal a sharp crack, and he comes tumbling back agin me. He turns, he does, and I sees a flash of metal, so I coshed him alongside the ear, and he staggers back off the end of the dock, and there's a splash. Another one of these here blokes turns on me, and somehow me foot gets tangled up we is and he goes down. I figures he'd best stay there, and I gives him a clip with me boot, and he's quite like, well, by now I'm kinda getting me steam up, but the negro he swings the third boyo in a sort of arm lock, and then lets go of him, and he flies across the dock and goes off the side. But there's no splash. Just a kinda soggy sound like a glob of suet being thrown against a wall. He got mixed up with the pilings, you see, so it's not to worry about him. But this here negro, he ain't in such good shape as I can readily see, so I pulls off my knuck. Knuck? I regretted my involuntary question as I handed Bertie a large glass. He did not choose to answer, but thanked me with a wide smile that disclosed perfectly formed teeth, startlingly white against his grimy, stubbled skin. As he drained half the tumbler, Holmes filled the conversational void. A silk scarf around the man's body was Bertie's, my good Watson, a tool of the trade, one might say. Now, Mr. Holmes, you knows I've always been straight since you give me that break a mite back. We'll not argue the point now, replied the sleuth. Despite the situation of the moment, there was a fleeting spark of humor in his clear, piercing eyes. What happened then? Holmes accepted a glass from me, and with a look at the body on the couch, we all drank a toast. Out of common courtesy, I was forced to retrieve Burlington Bertie's glass for a refill, listening intently as I did so. Well, Gov, he was sore hurt, but he manages to say your name. Holmes said like it's the most important thing in the bleeding world. So I says I know, sir, and he slips me a £5 note and says there's another one if'n I take him to you. Well, I figures I gotta do somethin' with him, and sides, maybe Dr. Watson here can patch him up. So I gets him to a hansom, and here he is. He said nothing else on the trip here? Burlington Bertie shook his head. 'Twas all he could do to breathe, Gov. Couple times I figures I'd be delivering a bleeding corpse. I didn't miss by much at that. Holmes thought for a moment, then his features sharpened with decision. All right, Bertie, I'm interested in the men on the dock, the assailants. One went into the water, you say? We can forget about him, is me thinking. He'll surface in the Thames estuary if when I reads the currents right. The other ain't no better. They'll have to pry him off that piling, and that's a fact. Then it is the third man. Holmes crossed to the desk, opening the cash drawer and extracting a bill. Here is the other fiver you were promised. Now get back to the docks. The last of the assailants may still be there, and I want to know who he is, and especially who he works for. It's worth. Never mind, Mr. Holmes. Bertie's bull neck swiveled and he looked for a long moment towards the couch. Whoever that cove was, he put up a good fight. I figures I owes him something. I'll try and snare that third bird for you, and hits on the house. The burly man made as though to depart, but was arrested by a gesture from Holmes. The sleuth took a piece of the newspaper from the end table and wrapped it around the remnants of the silk scarf, which he retrieved from the waste basket. Take this with you, Bertie, and dump it somewhere. For all concerned, I think it is best that you forget this incident. What about the handsome driver? He's waiting, Gov. 'Tis me sister's fellow, and he owes me. Mum's the word. The stairs creaked in protest at the weight of Burlington Bertie as he descended. Another of those unusual types that I encountered through my association with the world's only consulting detective. As Holmes crossed towards the couch, I heard the front door being shut and bolts going home as Billy secured our outer portal. My friend was hunched down by the body, his eyes surveying the kinky hair and ebony skin, and the tall and muscular body. "Who is it, Holmes?" I inquired. "Haven't the faintest idea." "But he asked for you by name." Holmes shook his head. His thin fingers extracted a seaman's wallet from the inside pocket of the man's coat with the gentle touch of a pickpocket. Opening it, he studied a passport for a brief moment and then placed the wallet where he had found it. The name means nothing to me, Watson. However, the papers could be forged. There's a lot of that going on now. Holmes's eyes seemed to attack the dead face like twin scalpels, searching for some indication, some identity clue perhaps. A Nubian, I would say, possibly a Wahhabi, but I don't think so. From the Sudan, no doubt. His fingers touched the head gently and then inspected the hairline, which was low on the forehead. "Now, this is interesting," he stated almost to himself. Suddenly he seized the man's hands, holding them palms down, staring intently at the nails. He rose, crossed to the mantel and seized a clasp knife that was thrust through the unanswered correspondence. Allowing letters to spill on the floor, he returned to the corpse, and, it seemed to me, began to scrape at the nail of one finger. I was momentarily horrified, but then that lean face turned towards me, and there was the half smile of triumph on his lips. "I knew all was not as it seemed," he said, flinging the knife to the floor. Holmes crossed to the door, which he opened as I watched in silent amazement. Before he could call, our loyal page boy appeared. "Billy," said Holmes in his clipped manner, always so evident when he was hot on the scent, "I want you to secure a carriage and go immediately to the Diogenes Club. Tell Mr. Mycroft, Holmes, to come immediately. Speak only to him. If he is not there, do not leave a message. Then hasten to Scotland Yard and find Inspector Alec MacDonald. He is an habitually late worker, and will probably still be there. Impress upon him the importance of coming back here with you." He slipped the lad some coins. "You understand?" Billy's impish face was aglow. "Right on, sir." Then he was gone. Holmes closed our door with satisfaction. He regarded the body on the couch for a brief moment, and then surveyed me with his slow smile. "A bit puzzled, old chap?" "To say the least. What has your brother to do with this?" "Everything. Burlington Bertie acted in good faith. The man said 'Holmes,' and he brought him here. The corpse is but recently from Egypt. His passport told me that, and in appearance he is of the Sudan, you see. Bertie brought him to the wrong Holmes. The dead man wanted Mycroft all along."